Hello, and welcome to Superb Woman Sundays at 7. I'm your host, Janet Neal, and I am so pleased that you've joined us tonight on International Women's Day. I'm thrilled that we get to be part of that. You know, I never even heard of International Women's Day until maybe 2-3 years ago when some international friends of mine were telling me about it. And now I'm just starting to hear more about it. You know, a day to really celebrate women. It's not just mothers like we do in the United States, but women in general. And I think having the Superb Woman Sundays at 7 on International Women's Day is just a perfect thing. And to make it even more special, we have a global advocate for orphans on today, Stephanie Fast, and I'm so excited to hear her story. It's an unbelievable one. But before we get to Stephanie, let me just tell you a little bit more about the Superb Woman. I started the Superb Woman believing that women have the power to change this world, and that so many of us either don't realize that we have power or we give that power away. Probably unconsciously we're giving it away. And so what I want to do is to make women conscious, to make them understand that they are powerful beings, that they do have power to use. And the way they find that power is by learning to be. Not do, it's be first and then do. So it's not about being a superwoman and how many things can you do. It's about being a superb woman. It's all about the be. Take that time to step back, to understand yourself. What are your values? What are your strengths, your passions? And then develop, craft, live a life that takes advantage of all of that. And I guarantee it will be a very powerful life as a result. So I have met all these amazing, superb women on my journey, and I am so grateful for that. And I want their stories to be told because I know that I'm the type of person that learns by example. I learn from seeing what other women have done. And so that's why I do this show, to be able to highlight other women who are really living their life to its fullest. And Stephanie Fast is no exception. Stephanie has a story like none other that I have ever heard. She will tell you it all in a minute, but just a little brief bit about it. I met Stephanie through a mutual friend, a woman, Judith Katz, who is a publicist that's been working with Stephanie and promoting her book, which we'll hear more about too. And I'm so grateful to Judith for introducing me because Stephanie's story is a unique one. It's about being an orphan in Korea during the Korean War, being abandoned, and then learning how to love again and to become an advocate for orphans globally. So I can't tell that story, but Stephanie can. So Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Janet, thank you so much for having me on here. Yes, it is International Women's Day, and I want to celebrate every woman that's out there, and I want to say go for it. Be all that you were created and designed to be. And it is so true. It is all about being and not about the roles and the demands or, the stereotype of what we think women should be. For me, I am an orphan advocate, and what that means is that I believe every child that is born deserves to have a family. And so whether it's through international adoption, but that is becoming so difficult now, we are really advocating adoption within the country of their birth, but that's a whole education in itself, teaching women to love children that is not out of their own womb. Now that's being, right? Being who you're created to be and to love beyond what you think you can love. And so for me, that is a vital part because I know I'm so loved today. Like you said, I am a war child. I was fathered. My father was an American GI as far as I know, and my mom was a Korean woman. I know nothing about my birth parents at all. I have vague memories of my mom. How accurate they are, I really can't tell you. But I do remember when I was about 4.5. Now, I say that because I really don't know my own age. I was given an age when I became an American citizen. They took me to the U.S. Embassy. They checked my teeth. And according to how many teeth I had, they sort of came up with an age. And so they chose the youngest age, which I'm really, really thankful. So if we start with that, I was probably about 4.5. And I do remember vividly my mom putting me on a train and telling me that I was going to go somewhere and someone was going to take care of me. I had never been on a train ride, so the fact that my mom really wasn't going with me was a little scary, but not overly scary. But at the end, when I got to the train station where I thought I was to get off, I got off, and the person that was supposed to meet me never showed up. So
Wow.
what does a little 4.5-year-old girl do when she finds herself actually abandoned? I didn't realize it really until the second day. The first night, I was shooed out of the train station. I slept under an oxen cart, and the little 4-year-old, hearing all the night noises and hearing the rumble in her tummy and trying to stay warm in the clothing that her mom had put her in. But I had this determination that my mommy was going to find me, or the person that was supposed to take care of me would come find me, but he never came. And so about after the second night, I was determined on my own to find my own mother, to go back to where I started from.
Wow.
But I didn't remember the name of the town that I started from, and and all the villages back then sort of looked similar. But I remember getting on the railroad track saying, I'm gonna head home. But that was a 3-year journey.
Wow. 3
Four and
years.
a
Can't
half.
even imagine. Can't even imagine.
Yeah, I mean, as an adult now, I sort of go, how in the world did I do it? But I do believe in miracles. You hear miracle stories all the time, and I don't know why. For some people, they have miracle after miracle, and for other people, it doesn't happen. But I know my life was a miracle, because in reality, there's no way I could have survived the seasons that I did in South Korea. Now, one of the advantages for me was I was out in the country where food was a little bit more available, because the farmers grew vegetables in the spring and fruit in the summer and crops in the fall. But in the wintertime, I had no food whatsoever, had absolutely no shelter. I lived in little foxholes that the soldiers had dug out during the war. The clothes that my mom had put on me had basically dissolved by then. The shoes that I was wearing was not something that I could wear anymore. So I made my own clothing out of straw and rice sacks, and I stole from the farmers. I stole from the farmers markets. I would crawl into villagers' kitchen during the night trying to stay warm. So I became what you would call almost an animal after a while. The villagers, when they saw me, although I looked real Asian back then, I have real curly hair, which is very unusual for Asians.
Right.
I have this crease in my eye that sometimes Koreans now pay money for it.
Right.
Just a lot of little things that when they looked at me, they realized that I was not complete Korean. And that in itself, in the 50s and 60s, and even into the late 70s, and maybe even to the 80s, to be biracial was almost considered a non-human being. Right. And I also was a reminder of the war. I was a reminder that some of their women had sold themselves to these soldiers, or some of these women had been raped by foreign soldiers. So they would try to erase who I was. But mainly it was because I was stealing what was so precious to them, food.
Right.
In the 50s and 60s, food would be like gold would be for us, or our bank account. And so I have memories of being tied to trees and being beaten. I have memories of being thrown into wells that had been abandoned by the farmers because it had become septic, being tied to water wheels and tried to drown, thrown into human septic wells, and just and they had a label that they called girls like me or children like me, which was Tugi. And the nice way to say that would be, you half breed. But in reality, it basically meant that I was the lowest of the lowest, worse than a pig or worse than a dog. And that just became my identity, and that's who I was. When I was around 7 years old, actually, I was dying on a garbage heap, and I was rescued by a Swedish nurse.
Wow.
And she nursed me back to life and placed me in an orphanage. And I was in that orphanage for about a year and a half. But even in the orphanage, there was just a lot of abuse, because you take in hundreds of children that have known nothing but trauma, and guess what? They bring trauma to each other. And the orphanage ran like a prison. You got up at a certain time every day, did your morning march, and, ate in a line, and, it was all barbed wired in. And so that was just sort of the life that I had. But by now, I'm like 8.5. Every once in a while, children would go missing, and we would ask the workers, where did these children go? And we were told that the babies were going to America or to Canada or to Europe. But I didn't know what adoption was. I just thought, oh, well, if they go to America, it's like going to Disneyland, right? And so that was my life. But when I was about 8.5 years old, a foreign couple came to the orphanage, and they wanted to adopt a little baby boy. They had a name all picked out, and I watched them as they were loving on these little babies, and especially the man, because I had gone through a lot of things in the hands of men when I lived on the streets, and so I just was so afraid of them. And this man was like a giant. I'm 8.5, but I weigh, like 30 pounds. I have lice so bad in my hair that it's more white and dark. I have worms so bad in my stomach that they were crawling out of my throat. I still had the effects of being on the streets for 3 years. Still the dirt caked on my elbows and knees, boils from malnutrition. I had an eye that was lazy. And I watched this giant of a man as he picked up these babies. And what amazed me about this man was that he was crying. I could not understand why this giant of a man with such enormous hands, he could have taken 5 babies in his hand and just sort of went like this, But he was crying over these babies. And so I came a little closer to where he was. And he put that baby down. He picked up a second baby. His wife was, of course, there with him. She was loving on these babies. And he saw me from the corner of his eyes. And he put that baby down, and he came over to where I was. And I don't know how people understand what redemption means, your life changing, your life having a picture of what a true person that sees beyond what you look like means. But when I think back to that moment in that courtyard with that man, I know what love feels like, because I didn't know what love was. Yeah. He got down as low as he could. And remember, I'm almost 9 years old, but just weigh a little over 30 pounds or a little under 30 pounds, around that size. And he got down almost to the ground, because that's how low I was. And I'll never forget him taking that huge hand and just laying it on my face, just like this. I mean, I'm a grandma now, Janet, and I can still feel that hand when I go back to that memory. And because I knew what a bad touch was, I knew that touch was different. I mean, everybody knows the difference between a good touch and a bad touch. And my heart, for the first time since I was abandoned by my mother, began to feel something that was positive. But because I had not felt that in so long, I didn't know what to do. So I did what I had learned to do the past 3 years, and that was I yanked the hand off my face and I spit on him.
Oh, wow.
You know, this couple, they were in their late 20s. They had no biological children. They desperately wanted a baby boy. This
Mm.
girl had just finished spitting on him, and they left that day, but 24 hours later, they came back to the orphanage, and they took me home with them and
Wow.
started the process of adoption. And
Mm.
it took them 3 years to adopt me, and they were missionaries there in South Korea. So they stayed the whole 3 years while they were going through the process of adopting me. But I got to live with them, watch them love me. For the first 2 weeks, they did nothing but bathe me, it seemed like, constantly, because they had to get all the dirt off of me. Gave me the medicine that I needed to get rid of the worm. They shaved my head to get rid of the lice. They took me to a doctor to correct my eye issues. And within just a few months, you would have never known that I was the girl that had looked like what I looked like before. But inwardly, I was trapped. I think, I don't know why, and I think it's because we want to be what people say we should be and not who we are. And
Mm.
because I was told I was something that I was not, I lived in that lie for a long time. Even though everything outward changed, I had these amazing, loving parents. They brought me to the States. I became an American citizen. I did well in school. I had friends. My community was wonderful. But behind closed doors, I still saw myself as a Tukey.
Mm.
I saw myself as a throwaway. I saw myself as an abandoned. I felt I had absolutely no value or worth. And so when I was like in my late teenage years, I just came to a crossroads in my life. It was like, okay, either I know as an adult I'm going to be who I think I am inside, or I'm going to trust what my mom and dad say I am.
Mm.
And for me to do that trust, I had to step across a threshold and grab a faith. And for me, faith was my belief in a God that knew me before I was born and had a plan for my life. And so nothing in me believed that, but we all have a spirit. We're born with a spirit, and that spirit has to connect with the higher spirit. And for me, it was God. And I said, God, if you're what mom and dad say you are, and I think I know because they're showing me love, even though I keep spitting at them over and over. And that was a beginning of a change for me. But even after that, for 10 years or so, I wanted to be everything everybody wanted me to be. And, because of the lies that I had from my childhood, I still sort of lived this confused life. And finally, one day I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, okay, Stephanie, who are you? And I realized it was not the way I looked. It was not according to what type of school I went to. It was not according to my husband. It was not according to my bank account, but it was according to who I told myself I was on the inside. And so I began to change from that perspective. I began to see myself, and I began to love what I look like. I hated what I looked like for years and years, and I wanted to look Western. I wanted to look like you, Janet. And I would change my hair color and put blue contacts on and, do all the things that I thought would make me fit in. And I realized when I made that internal change that it was not about my outward appearance or about my outward circumstances, but that it was all about how I saw myself in the reflection of the God that created me. And that was the beginning of a change and beginning of me realizing there were thousands and thousands and actually millions and millions of young girls out there that struggled just the way that I struggled. And could I be bold enough to share some of the ugly parts of my life so that they would see that this God that I believed could transform their life also. Yeah.
Okay, Stephanie, so I have chills going up one side and down the other. Thank you so much for sharing that. I can't even talk.
Oh,
But it's such a great example of what I'm talking about being a superb woman, about the being. You're talking about connecting what is of core importance to you, about getting
right.
back to who you are. It's all about the being. And, you have gone through the extremes of life.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but there are women out there who have not lived anything near the extremes, but have the same feelings. And I think we can all relate to that
Yeah.
feeling that you have to, all those shoulds out there that you should do what other people tell you to do.
Mhm.
So thank you so much for sharing that and for being a beacon of hope for all of us out there.
Thank you. Well, I really believe, Janet, that all of us have different stories. But, even though they may not have the extreme that I did, I think so many women are called what you call orphans of the heart.
Oh,
If we're not women of being, we are orphans of the heart. And it
wow,
is the heart that has to change before anything else changes in our lives.
wow, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Thank
So
you.
let me get back to this idea of shoulds
Yes.
because I talk about that with superb women, and you had mentioned that there's all these shoulds that were going on in your head as you were growing up and as a young woman. So what were some of the shoulds that you have let go of from that time?
For me, it was a should of performance.
Mm-hmm.
I thought if I performed, people would love me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing of it is, people did love me because I performed. Once I said, okay, I'm just going to be who I'm created to be, who I'm crafted to be, who I'm designed to be, and I began to say, what gives me passion?
Yep.
People really did not turn their backs on me. I lived with this fear of rejection for so many years. So I lived with all the shoulds in my life. But once I let that go and just started being who I was created to be, I realized the people that were most important in my life did not turn their backs on me.
Beautiful. So you had two angels as parents. Wow, that's just so beautiful. Who else has been helping you on your journey through life?
Well, definitely the person that helped me the most was my father. He
Mm.
laid a foundation for me to know what unconditional love looked like. And then the Lord gave me a wonderful husband. He has walked through, we'll be married 42 years in June.
Wow,
He
congratulations.
has walked through many deep valleys with me.
Hmm.
In the being,
Hmm.
there's a lot of things you have to let go, right?
Yes.
And in letting go, there's a lot of fear in that. And he has been really a voice in my life to say, okay, Stephanie, for one thing, I'm not going to reject you by your behavior.
Mm.
I'm going to be there for you continuously, but I'm also going to speak the truth to you. And I've allowed him to do that. That's another thing, too. You can have someone like that in your life, but you have to be accountable to them. And so I've given my husband permission to be that accountability in my life because I realize for women like me, there will be echoes from your childhood that will follow you to your grave. And
Hmm.
unless you live in truth, and unless you live in accountability and responsibility for your own self, you can always go backwards and not forward.
Mm. Wow. Beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Yeah.
So I know you've got a book that's out there. Tell us about your book.
It is actually, I have it right here. Can you see it? It's called
I
She
sure.
Is Mine, and it's my full childhood story. I felt it was really strong for me to tell the full story from the time I was abandoned till the time I became an American citizen, which was at the age of 12, to let the reader see a journey that a child goes through when she is not rescued.
Yes.
And yet, also the spirit of the child.
Mm.
There
Mm-hmm.
was a spirit in me as a little girl that I believe was placed there from the beginning of time. Some of it, of course, is genetic, but I think a lot of it is spiritual.
Yes.
And it's there. And if we listen to it without even realizing it, I didn't know there was a God, you know. But as I tell the story, I realize there was someone there all the time. So it's actually a miracle story. Yeah, but it's my childhood story. But I wrote it so that everyone reading it could say, what can I do for the 150 million orphans that we have around the world?
And tell us a little bit more about what you do as an advocate for orphans.
Well, one is I tell my story. I believe that is the most important because that spotlights what a child, although my story was, 55 years ago, 60 years ago, really in the third world countries, life of a child that's abandoned or loses its parents through war or famine or whatever, their story does not change. Right. And unless an organization or an individual comes in and says, this child has value, this child has worth, and I will do something about it, it never changes. So I tell my story to spotlight the orphan crisis that is continuously going on in the world, and it seems to be getting bigger and bigger because there's just more and more wars than we've ever been in before. And so it's always the children that suffer the most. Secondly, we actually connect with organizations that work in the countries where adoptions can happen in their country. So, of course, adoption is a little different there. We do more like little group homes for the children, and we have a mother and a father that will commit themselves to say, we will raise these children as ours. So we work a lot with people locally in the countries and then with organizations here. Third that I do is here in the States, there are a lot of young women that come from adoption or come from abuse that just need someone to mentor them. I do a lot of local mentoring, like through our prison system here, through halfway houses here, but one-on-one with young women that just call and say, will you mentor me? And I can't say yes to all of them. I wish I could, but as many as we can, yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you for your service because you really are doing remarkable things, and thank you very much for that.
I love every minute of it.
It shows. It shows.
Thank you.
So at the end of this, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you will see a slide that will have all of Stephanie's contact information and more information about her book. And Stephanie, can you get the book on Amazon?
Yes, on Amazon, or they can order through stephaniefast.org.
Okay, excellent. And we just have a couple of minutes left. Do you have anything else that's coming up in the future you want to tell us about?
Well, we're working on the second book, which is called Spirit of Mine, and actually it will be different steps that I took to become who I feel God intended me to be today. And so we are working on it. I don't know how long it'll take. I mean, I am not a writer. That is not my gifting. So it's a long process. And also, we are in the process of just traveling and letting people know what it is to be who God created you to be.
Do you have any speaking engagements coming up that people can find out about?
Oh, yes. I usually speak about 2 or 3 times a month all across America. Again, if they just go on my website, they can see the different places that I'm going to be.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Well, Stephanie, again, thank you so very much for being my guest, for being such a beautiful example of a superb woman.
Well, thank you so much, Janet, and bless you in what you do.
Thanks. Thanks, and thank you all for joining us. And my guest next week will be Kessie Gibson. Kessie's a remarkable young woman who has come from a background, a Wharton MBA, working in the finance industry, and then doing one of those things that we talk about a lot, stepping back and taking a look at what's really important. And now she's got a fashion industry career going that's helping so many local artisans around the world. So make sure you stay tuned next week for Superb Woman Sundays at 7. And until then, have just a fabulous week.